Imagine waking up one day and realizing that staying in your hometown means a life of struggle, poverty, and fear. But leaving, that could mean opportunity, freedom, and a fresh start. What would you do? Between 1910 and 1970, over 6 million African Americans faced this exact choice. They left behind everything they knew, their homes, families, and communities, hoping to escape racial violence and economic hardship in the South. Their journey, known as the Great Migration, didn't just change their lives. It reshaped the United States forever. The early 20th century was a time of severe racial discrimination in the southern United States. The Jim Crow laws enforced segregation, ensuring that African Americans were treated as second-class citizens. Schools, public transportation, restaurants, and even drinking fountains were separated by race. But segregation was just one part of the problem. White supremacist groups terrorized black communities, and lynchings were widespread. According to historical records, thousands of African Americans were murdered simply for challenging the racial hierarchy or for accusations that were never proven. On top of these dangers, economic opportunities for African Americans in the South were nearly non-existent. Most were trapped in a system called sharecropping, where they farmed land owned by white landlords in exchange for a portion of the crops. But this system was designed to keep black farmers in poverty. Landowners charged high fees for supplies, manipulated contracts, and often left sharecroppers in endless cycles of debt. Meanwhile, in the North, a different world was emerging. The Industrial Revolution had transformed cities like Chicago, Detroit, New York, and Pittsburgh into economic powerhouses. Factories, steel mills, and railroads were booming, and they needed workers. When World War I began, thousands of white men went to fight in Europe, leaving factories desperate for labor. For many African Americans in the South, this was the opportunity they had been waiting for. Between 1910 and 1940, approximately 1.6 million African Americans left the South in search of a better life. The journey north was not easy. Many families had little money and had to travel by train, bus, or even on foot. Some were tricked by recruiters who promised jobs that didn't exist. Others were stopped by white authorities who tried to prevent them from leaving. Newspapers like the Chicago Defender played a crucial role in spreading information about opportunities in the North. They encouraged black families to move, published job listings, and warned about the dangers they might face on the journey. Once arrived in cities like New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago, they faced new challenges. While there were no Jim Crow laws in the North, racism was still deeply rooted in society. Many white residents resented the arrival of black workers, fearing job competition. Some African Americans found jobs in factories, but they were often given the lowest paying and most dangerous positions. Labor unions frequently excluded black workers, making it difficult to fight for better conditions. Housing was another major issue. White landlords refused to rent to black families in many areas, forcing them into overcrowded neighborhoods. Places like Chicago's South Side and Harlem in New York became heavily populated black communities. Housing segregation policies, such as redlining, ensured that these neighborhoods remained underdeveloped, with poor infrastructure, schools, and healthcare services. Despite these hardships, African American communities in the North began to thrive. The Harlem Renaissance, a cultural movement of the 1920s, brought a wave of black artistic and intellectual achievement. Writers like Langston Hughes, musicians like Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong, and activists like W.E.B. Du Bois helped shape a new cultural identity. Jazz and blues, once limited to the South, became national sensations. Then came World War II, and with it, the Second Great Migration. This time, over 5 million African Americans moved, not only to northern cities, but also to the West Coast, settling in places like Los Angeles, Oakland, and Seattle. World War II created an even greater demand for labor. Factories producing weapons, aircraft, and other wartime supplies needed workers, and many African Americans found jobs in these industries. However, racial tensions also increased. In some cities, white workers protested against black employment, leading to violent clashes. The most infamous example was the Detroit Race Riot of 1943, where conflicts between black and white residents escalated into deadly violence. Huge problem. In the North and West, banks and real estate agents used a policy called redlining, which prevented black families from buying homes in white neighborhoods. Many black Americans were forced into segregated housing projects with poor living conditions, while white suburbs flourished. Even with these obstacles, the Second Great Migration helped fuel the civil rights movement. Many of the movement's key figures, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and Rosa Parks, came from families who had migrated. As black communities in northern and western cities grew, so did their political power. Organizations like the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, gained influence, and black voters played a crucial role in elections. By 1970, the Great Migration had permanently reshaped the racial demographics of the United States. Cities that once had small black populations became major cultural and political centers. The impact of this migration is still visible today in many ways. Black communities in cities like Chicago, Detroit, and Atlanta became powerful voting blocs. Over time, this led to the election of black mayors, congresspeople, and other leaders. The migration contributed to the spread of jazz, blues, and later hip-hop, all of which have had a lasting impact on global music and culture. While black Americans found better opportunities in the North and West, systemic racism continued. Many were still limited to low-paying jobs and faced housing discrimination, challenges that persist today. Without the Great Migration, the civil rights movement might not have had the same momentum. The migration helped create a new black middle class and strengthened activism against segregation and discrimination. Even today, the legacy of the Great Migration is seen in the political, economic, and cultural landscape of the United States. It was more than just a movement of people. It was a movement that transformed history.